But crucially, from our viewpoint, and this is about creating this long-term industry, we're talking about 800 megawatts to a gigawatt of that target coming from marine hydrokinetic power. And in that sense, it's, the whole electricity industry is really fascinating because it's the market and policy opportunity set by government that creates the market opportunity. And from that, we've got the Pentland Firth and Orkney Waters leasing round. And from our viewpoint, it's very much the jewel in the crown, not just of the Scottish marine industry, but probably some of the world's industry. We've got 11 sites, we've got 8 developers and utilities, 1 gigawatt proposed for tidal and 600 megawatts proposed for wave. Indeed, if the Crown Estate, who manage the seabed and path of the Scottish and UK governments, they've awarded just about 1.8, 1.9 gigawatts of pre-consents for lease around the UK and GB waters over the past couple of years, and 90% of that is this one location itself. So it's clear we've got an industry, one that's around 10 to 15 years old, one that's growing, and after a sluggish start and a few scrapes and bumps that continue, it's one that's growing. So let's start with jobs, and some of you, if you heard me speak here last year, this is a figure that may be familiar. Scotland has about 11 to 12,000 people involved directly in renewable energy. That's actually bizarrely more people than is involved in the Scotch whisky industry. Yeah, remarkable, but you can actually produce a lot of whisky with very few people, but we know that renewable energy takes a big workforce. Crucially, from our side, the wave and tidal industry, we've probably got about 600 people directly involved in the wave and tidal sector. That's directly employed in companies that do nothing but wave and tidal. And we estimate around half of those are in that small island group of Orkney up in the north of Scotland, an island group of 20,000 people. Testing, as I mentioned, EMEC, European Marine Energy Centre, remains the world's only fully grid-connected wave and tidal test centre. 10 years old now, it's all its berths full, and actually funding for a 5th wave berth was actually just awarded to the Scottish Government a few weeks ago. So we're looking to expand and develop that centre. And it's EMEC's success that highlights where there are so many wave and tidal devices in the waters around Scotland. Like a year ago we were saying there were more devices in the water around Scotland than the rest of the world put together. I think that's changed a wee bit now. There's a different phrase that First Minister uses, but I'm not quite sure what it is. But crucially, it's not just devices, we're also the HQ for a number of quite important companies, but also we're very much the testing location of choice for a large number of global companies. Japanese, Kawasaki are coming, Finnish, American companies, Irish and German. And big OEMs, as we all know, one of the remarkable things over the past year is the speed at which large OEMs like Siemens and Alstom have actually been moving into buying up tidal companies that have been based in the UK. So we're also looking at a fairly widespread group of technologies. You know, we've got second generation devices covering deep water and nearshore water, seabed and floating tidal, and some other activities. But also, I think unique in having the Salter Prize, which is like an X Prize for the wave and tidal industry. It's worth about $15 million, and it's been put out there by the Scottish Government to really stimulate and give an incentive for companies to get things, arrays in the water. It's will be won by the team that generates the greatest volume of electrical output over a set minimum hurdle of 100 gigawatt hours over a continuous 2-year period using only the power of the sea. And it's actually a cooperation with the National Geographical Society based just up the road, and was actually formally launched in Orkney last year and has now got 5 confirmed competitors. Of course, money is important. The Scottish Government has recognised that public resource to overcome market failure is absolutely critical. And the Scottish Government, in the last budget round a couple of years ago, identified clearly £300 million, which is about $450 million, to focus on catalysing the offshore renewables industry in Scotland. It covers large-scale infrastructure, also has dedicated funds for wave and tidal research and development, testing and array deployment. And we're also just in the process of having set up a renewable energy investment fund, seeded with about £100 million, $150 million worth of public fund to provide debt finance to marine renewable projects. And currently with 5 rocks, whatever happens in electricity market reform, we've still got some of the most attractive incentives for generating electricity from marine and tidal anywhere in the world at the moment. But of course, none of this can happen without infrastructure on the ground. A lot of my focus over the past couple of years has been trying to identify that where we've got the ports and harbours and fabrication facilities in place to support the industry. And that's been very much a voyage of discovery, both with ourselves and the developers, because it's as we develop plans for ports and harbours, working alongside and actually understanding what the developers actually want and need is crucial. So that's why we've done a very European thing. We've set up a plan, a National Renewables Infrastructure Plan, identified resource, and are working with the industry to actually make sure that we have the exact resource that's available as close to the deployment centres as is physically possible, that makes sure that they can reduce risk for them as much as possible. So, while we've been focusing on meeting this infrastructure challenge, we also know that there are pretty serious funding, innovation, testing, structural and governance issues that need to be overcome. And these are not trivial. We're actually at a really interesting space now as we move forward over the next few years. What we've been doing up till now, in some ways, could be the easy bit. In fact, you could almost argue that getting to this stage, the early stage research and development, the prototyping, demonstrating the single devices in the water, doing some of the early stage developments, actually has been the easy bit, the fun bit. Now, as we move forward over the next, towards the rest of this decade, we're actually moving into something that's really quite hard, something that is probably, it requires quite a different focus, not just from the industry, but from government. So we're talking about creating effectively a new global electricity generation sector. We're talking about large-scale capitalisation. We're talking about big industrialisations of new technologies. It's taking the Wright brothers and turning it into a Boeing. It's taking very early things that happened in Daimler in Germany and getting Henry T. Ford to take that forward. We're talking about creating the procedures and protocols for safe, deep water operations so we don't have an industry that kills people. And that's going to require a whole new approach, a whole new people, new capital, and a whole new players. And that's a space, as I said, which is about to step into that. In Scotland, in France, Canada, early stage arrays are all at different stages of planning, but just about to go. In fact, with Scotland and Scottish Power Renewables Isla project is now fully consented, and they're in the very final stages of their advanced stages of deployment planning, looking to go in the water next year. The same with Maygen up in Caithness. They expect their consents later this year, fingers crossed, and they're ready to start deployment in 2014. Other companies such as Vattenfall, Scottish and Southern Energy, Aquamarine and others are in MCT and are just a step or two behind. I think it's really important to stress how critical these projects are. If they falter, it's going to be a really serious blow to the marine hydrokinetic industry, not just in Scotland, right across Europe and the Americas and the Far East. Our sector is at the very early stage, and we're trying to do some really hard and challenging things. You know, two recent examples, the demise of Wavebob last week, and Voice retrenchment of their activities from Scotland to Germany, really show how early stage and fragile some of the activity that we're doing. So, to return back to what is the role of the public sector in this, and what can we actually do to give confidence to the industry and help it overcome some of these issues? Well, I think there are two key areas that we need to do in supporting the sector. First, and this is hard, is providing policy certainty, and secondly is reducing risk in a number of ways. Policy is hard, but we all know that the energy production projects that we're working on, 5 to 10 year planning cycles, then they're 25-year long projects. That's a 30-year lifespan for a project of 35 years. Politicians don't work in those cycles. They work in an electoral cycle of 4 to 5 years. And the one thing about politicians do is they change things. Developers need certainty. Politicians, by their very presence, change things. So support regimes, transmission charging, grid infrastructure, carbon targets, all create the policy and an economic environment which an industry can develop or not. And because, let's be honest, if you're trying to take a rational look at the most expensive and difficult way of producing electricity, you'd be doing it with a wave and tidal industry. But while we're here, next 10 years, we're starting to see the wave and tidal sector delivering on a number of fronts. It's delivering economic benefit. It's actually starting to deliver regular carbon-free electricity. But for me and my team, it's very much about creating these jobs and this wealth. And that is very important. It's not just in big cities like Glasgow or Edinburgh, or even Inverness where I'm based. The really interesting potential for the wave and tidal sector is because the power, the resource is on the edge, it's on the periphery. And that's where I think, and a lot of us around in this room are interested in how this can lead to economic redevelopment in small communities in peripheral parts of Europe and North America in the next 10 years. But also, and I guess this is where it comes back to seeing was the very early salter ducks 35 years ago when I was a schoolboy. It's about developing an intellectual legacy for places like Scotland, for places like the northwest of the Americas, that one that can be used by companies large and small and built on and exported right across the world. And that's why we're here. Thanks very much.